You're listening to the Around the Huddle podcast, powered by PAC-Hub. Around the Huddle, college sports beyond the game.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Around the Huddle podcast, powered by PAC-Hub. Around the Huddle, where we talk about college sports beyond the game. My name is John Gross, so happy to have you back for our second episode of this show. We had an awesome debut show with Kevin Hinchy, the founder and CEO of PAC-Hub, joining us, talking about all things PAC-Hub. If you missed that episode, I would recommend that you go back and watch it. You'll learn a lot. You'll learn about all of the fantastic features that are offered by PAC-Hub, which is truly a revolutionary service in this ever-changing landscape of college athletics. You can take a look bottom of your screen, the link to the website, pac-hub.com. PAC-Hub connecting athletes with opportunities. PAC-Hub is a way for student athletes to enter the transfer portal to then enter PAC-Hub, the PAC-Hub portal, and have their stats and bio information, transcripts, all of those valuable pieces of information that make it easier for coaches to find them. And on the flip side, it's a service that allows coaches to find said athletes. Beyond the portal itself, there are resources about NIL, about mental health, so many other fantastic aspects of PAC-Hub that can only be found at one place. That is www.pac-hub.com. As we touched on in episode 1, this is going to be a podcast where we talk about college sports beyond the game itself. That means we won't be recapping last night's game. We won't be previewing tomorrow's game. We will be talking about the business, the legal side, the politics of college athletics and this ever-changing landscape so that we can give you a resource, some insight, some information on how to navigate this challenging field. To do so, we are bringing on experts. And today we are thrilled to be joined by one of those experts. This is somebody who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a few years now. This is a guy who every time that I speak to him, doesn't matter what topic we talk about, I learn something. And I know that I will learn something new today, and you all will learn some new things today as well from our guest. Our guest is Sam Finkel. Sam is currently a sports and entertainment attorney with Fox Rothschild, working on sports immigration law, NIL, and other sports matters generally. He was a former undergraduate assistant coach with Penn State football from 2017 and 2020, so he knows the industry from the coaching side. He is a proud graduate of the Penn State Smeal College of Business and the Temple University Beasley School of Law. Both of those schools he graduated from with honors. Sam is also a staff writer for Inside the Birds, focusing predominantly on analytics. And he's also created a linear regression model projecting NFL contract values for various positions. Okay, so that is a mouthful. I think we're going to have to ask Sam about some of that stuff. But beyond that, he's going to give us some fantastic insight and information about NIL and this ever-changing landscape of college athletics. So without further ado, let's welcome in today's guest, my good friend, Sam Finkel. Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that very nice introduction. I'm very appreciative of it.
Look, it's well-deserved. And as I said, every time that I speak to you, I learn something new. So let's start right off the bat by learning something new. You mentioned, we just mentioned in your bio that you have created a linear regression model projecting NFL contract values for various positions. Can you put that in English, please?
Yeah, of course. So during law school, I actually created a class for it. And so the first year was the prototype of it. And what I did was I took historical market trends and certain variables I ran to make sure what was the significant variables. I think I did like 50 variables the first year for wide receivers. And so what I did was I took the free agent class and I looked at back on the history of it and to determine, what is the contract value for the receivers. And it was a pretty accurate model. And I did it, I believe, was the 2022 offseason. So one of the Christian Kirk was like one of the only outliers of the model. He was paid way more than the model projected. And then the second year, I used 200 variables, and I went back with 5 years instead of 3 years of data, and did quarterbacks. And that one served pretty accurate too. And that was the only ones that were really outliers were, I believe Daniel Jones was an extreme outlier on the model. And I think Jimmy G was deserved more according to the model, or Derek Carr deserved more depending on which version you look at. But that was the model. It took the historical data and it really just reviewed it through a linear regression to determine what those quarterbacks were worth based on the statistics that were found, that were deemed, statistically significant.
Wow, that's fascinating. So there we go. Already off the top, we're like 10 seconds into this interview. I've learned something brand new. So Sam, thank you for that. Before we dive in, I know that you do have just something that you quickly have to share.
Yeah. So I think it's important to let everyone know that what you hear from me is not legal advice, and that it is not the position of my firm. This is I'm doing this in my personal capacity. But enough with boring, obligatory lawyer, speeches. There you go.
Awesome. Well, Sam, again, we really appreciate you coming on today. Just to start, as an attorney, you work in the NIL landscape, in college athletics, something that you know very intimately, having worked for the Penn State football team. I would imagine that the attorneys weren't as involved in the day-to-day management of college athletes before the last few years. Is that correct?
So I'd say yes and no. So when I was working for the Penn State football program, there were former and current lawyers that were working in the compliance departments. And so like compliance is, as you know, very legal oriented. It's tangential, I think you could say. And oftentimes lawyers do that kind of role, or former lawyers do that kind of role. But to the extent that it is today, it's definitely drastically different, for sure.
It's amazing how many things have changed since you finished at Penn State. That was 2020, right? Here we are 4 years later, and it's like college sports is completely different. So from your perspective, what are some resources that you maybe use to stay up to date with all of the changes happening in college sports?
Yeah, so a lot of what I see is you're generally shared with me by colleagues or friends that are still in the industry. Whenever there's something interesting happens, I'll get it. But I also pride myself in going to a lot of events for it. So one event that I'd particularly like to shout out is I went to an NIL symposium where with Ken Jacobson at Temple Law, who is a thought leader in NIL, and I'm sure I'll mention him a bunch of times in this podcast just because I've gained so much insight from what he has created and what he's continued to do. But I also spoke at an NIL event of his too. But I think that a lot of it is just being around people who are constantly dealing with this. I deal with a lot of it myself every day. So being in the thick of it helps, but obviously news resources help a lot too. There's a lot of ways to stay involved for sure.
Can you give us some insight on your involvement in NIL as an attorney?
Sure. So far, what I've done is more of an advisory role, basically looking at the current state of the legislation and determining whether policies that our clients would like to implement basically comply with the current regulation, and is there risk involved. So that's kind of what I've done. I've also looked at some NIL agreements in just the sample of them, because I'm not a registered NIL agent, so I haven't really done any of that kind of work, but more of just looking at, is this okay?
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm one of the PAC-Hub's AI specialists. Today, I want to show you why PAC-Hub is the ultimate platform for college baseball players looking to transfer to a new college program. First, let's take a look at our extensive network of coaches. With over 150 coaches actively using our system, you have a huge pool of experts to connect with. Imagine having access to all these experienced coaches searching for talent like yours. You even have the ability to connect with any of these coaches via our internal messaging system. This means more opportunities to showcase your skills and find the perfect new team. Now let's switch gears and see things from a coach's perspective. Coaches can easily search for athletes by position or stat. Let's say I'm looking for a left-handed pitcher with good pitching stats. With just a few clicks, I can find top-performing pitchers who meet my criteria. This efficient search functionality ensures that coaches find the perfect fit for their teams and athletes get matched with opportunities that suit their strengths. PAC-Hub is all about connecting talent with opportunity. Whether you're an athlete looking to transfer to a new college team or a coach searching for the next star player, PAC-Hub has the tools you need to succeed. Don't miss out on the chance to be part of this amazing community. Join PAC-Hub today and take the next step in your baseball journey. Visit www.pac-hub.com to sign up now.
You kind of touched on something important there, NIL legislation. Things in the NIL world are changing daily. I know probably the most, I would say one of, if not the most impactful news, court cases, whatever you may want to call it, this house settlement, right? This is, I believe it'll be finalized in April. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's ongoing now. Things are kind of being talked about and the details are being worked out. This is a hot button issue that a lot of people are talking about. Can you give us like a brief overview of what this entails?
Absolutely. And I think you really hit the nail on the head. This is a very pivotal case and is preliminarily approved right now. And we'll see. I mean, as of last week, there were state senators that were writing opposition letters to it. And I believe it was like states like Oregon is the one that's really stuck in my mind, just because Oregon's stuck in my mind for obvious reasons. But basically, they're opposing it and they're saying it's violative of 17 state laws, 17 NIL state laws. So this is not going to be a clean process until April. There's still fight going on, and we'll see what happens. So I just wanted to say that before I really went into it. And actually, before I go into it, I think it's important to kind of understand how the mechanisms in which NIL kind of works. And I'm going to oversimplify a little bit. And you could stop me if you have any questions, like while I'm talking, or if I just drone on too much, because I could talk about this for another 3 hours.
Go for it.
But essentially, there are two main mechanisms by which the student athletes are being compensated, and those are through the universities themselves directly or through these collectives. So the interim NIL policy allows for these collectives, which are third-party entities that are essentially acting as pseudo front offices for these universities. And there's some space removed between the universities and them. What this House settlement does, part of it, they don't address this pay for play issue, but there are certainly implications and consequences for pay for play in what is proposed. But what they do is kind of attack this, compensation structure, the mechanisms. So what it does is it would put in like a salary cap, like almost like a professional model. And that's why you see like schools like Stanford hiring Andrew Luck as like a GM, because it's turning into this professional model where there would be like a 22% cap of the revenue that is permissive, but eventually it's going to be de facto required because you can't compete without giving it all. And because what the NCAA is really concerned about is this concept of fair market, right? They don't want, and it's a very interesting concept because fair is such a loose term. And because like, what is fair, right? Are we talking about equality or equity, right? In a free market, some people will be compensated significantly more, but in a fair market, is everybody compensated the same, like based on what position they play? So it's a really loose concept that they need to like iron out those details on. And there are other big problems with it because there's Title IX issues, especially as women's sports are increasingly growing more popular. How is this money going to be distributed? There's certainly implications the way the law is right now. And then there's antitrust issues involved, right? Because the NCAA is essentially a trade organization with 1,000 members, basically competing for resources and setting a collective artificial ceiling, which is obviously problematic for antitrust issues. And I hope I'm still staying on track with the
yes. Keep going, my friend. Keep going.
But basically, that's kind of where we're at. It's changing how student athletes would be compensated, and basically making the universities predominantly responsible and setting this artificial cap, and which scholarships actually count towards the cap, which is an interesting facet of it, and which is really interesting because I believe the stat is that 82% of NIL money goes through these collectives. So it would be a major change. And there's, like I said, there's so many problems with implementing this settlement, but there's so many problems if the settlement is not implemented. So really the main answer would be if Congress acted on this, but I don't see that happening. anytime soon.
Okay. So many things I want to hit on there. First of all, would this render NIL moot? Would this end everything NIL related because the schools would be paying the athletes directly?
No, it wouldn't. There still would be that facet of it, but it would just be through the university more instead of the actual, collectives. As to how it would affect that 22% number, I am not sure on, but I can get back to you on that. That is an interesting facet. Now,
you mentioned that schools have to hit that 22% if they want to compete, right? That's the reality.
It's de facto requirement. Yeah.
Right. But by the letter of the law, they don't have to, but de facto requirement, they're going to have to if they want to compete. I also read that schools can choose to opt in or opt out of that as well. One of the things that I feel people don't realize about college sports is that the majority of athletic programs lose money. So my question to you, and you may not have the answer to this because I don't know if anyone does, where does this money come from? If 22% is going to go to student athletes, where does that money come from? Where does that leave these athletic departments?
I will answer your question with another question. How do you think this is going to affect the smaller schools?
Yep.
Or the schools that are not smaller but compete at the highest level but don't have the resources? Like you said, they are essentially going to be, it's going to turn into this almost tier system, I think is the best way to kind of envision this, right? So like your top tier schools that have the money and make profit are going to just be in a league ahead of everyone else. It's going to increase this disparity of talent that we've seen in college sports that makes the game exciting when there isn't this disparity, right? It's more fun when anybody can win March Madness. It's more fun when, I like the 12 games playoffs format for football, but hey, that's another issue. But it's more fun when anybody can win. It's less fun when it's Alabama, unless you're an Alabama fan. Then
right.
It's probably very fun.
Then you don't mind it. Although this year, of course, the Crimson Tide being left out, a little bit of controversy there, but that's a whole different issue. We could touch on that on a later episode.
For sure.
Okay. From the student athlete perspective, actually, let's take a step back. Former student athletes, my understanding is that they will get a piece of the pie here as well. What's the deal with that?
So, that part of the settlement is compensating them for, missing out on this opportunity. But I don't know the exact details of that component of it, but I do imagine it would be significantly reduced than as of what they would have had they had been athletes. And I think that's just part of how settlements work. But I do think they're going to get some compensation based on what they missed out on because of how everything's transferred. Like you said, 4 years ago when I was coaching, it was a completely different beast. It just is changed so much and it's going to only continue to change. So
right. Well, think back to this. 2017, your first year working with the team, Saquon Barkley was the star of the Penn State football team. Think about what his NIL value would have been at that point. There's no way that this settlement can equal that amount that he would have gotten back then, right?
I will say he's probably doing just fine right now. I'm also an Eagles fan, so I'm selfishly very happy with how his career has turned out and hope it only continues to go in that direction. But I think your point is very valid, especially for athletes that were, college superstars that didn't necessarily translate to the next level. And that really peaked in college in terms of how they could, monetize themselves.
Let's go to the present. Current student athletes or future student athletes, what are the biggest things that they should know about this settlement and how it might impact them?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing that they should know is that what they know today might not be what they know tomorrow. No, but what I would really say is get representation. There are people that like lawyers or agents that track this stuff every day and that are qualified and understand how the changes are. And, get the representation there. The thing is, you're going to, the way that it's going, you can't rely on yourself anymore. It's just not practical, or else you get in situations like Jervon Dexter. I don't know if you heard about what happened there. But basically a company agreed to give him a loan in exchange for part of his pro salary in the future. And that's still being reviewed in court today. But these things, and that's predatory, right? Because like you're giving him a significantly lower portion of money. And look, he ended up being a much higher pick than he was projected at the time, but taking away that, you know, his pro salary is predatory. And had he had adequate representation, it probably would have been avoided. And I actually think it's a good time to shout out Ken Jacobson one more time, as I probably will do one more time throughout the program. But he has a program at Temple Law where Temple students can provide this kind of advice for free under supervised attorney and get this experience while also providing no cost to these athletes. So I think programs like that will probably happen across the country. But if there is a lot of money at stake, it's worth getting representation. That's what I'd say.
It's fascinating. It is absolutely fascinating. There are so many other talking points that are addressed in this case. I know the scholarships is one of them, with teams now that the scholarship limit has been increased. I think for football, it's 105 scholarships, might limit walk-on chances, but whatever. The baseball, softball teams might have more scholarships under this as well. As we've touched on a couple of times, you know, from the day that we're recording this until things are finalized, things are almost guaranteed to change. So definitely stay tuned, to the news and keep watching and keep listening and keep reading to all of those changes. I'm sure we can go on about House for hours, as you said. Let's go to NIL specifically, okay? Because what we want to do on this show is give some information to student athletes, to their families who maybe don't know much about NIL. Let's start just base level. What is NIL?
Yeah, so it stands for name, image, and likeness. And what it is basically compensating you for your right of publicity. And it's super fascinating how it came to terms. Like, this issue is a non-issue essentially for every other field, right? So people make money off of the right of publicity all the time. And basically, there's this dichotomy that's been created in sports that basically says we have this different structure that we're going to look at people's compensation from. And that's what NIL is. And that's why the laws are so uneven, just particularly in sports. Like, for instance, there's an article on this by Jody Balsam. It's called False Start on NIL. I recommend definitely checking it out to anybody. And she spoke at the symposium. And what she said is basically you should treat everyone equally. And the example she gave was Emma Watson, who was at Brown University, and she capitalized on her right of publicity, didn't have to report it to the school, and she was able to make these endorsement deals without any ramification, but based on her right of publicity. So going back to your question, it is basically capitalizing on your clout or your fame or your basically your social status, right? It's leveraging that in order to get payment is a hard word because it's not always monetary, but that's essentially what it is.
For an athlete who is in college now, are the rules different by state, by school, by conference?
Yes.
Yes.
They're all of them. So that's another big problem. One of these problems is there's no uniformity. So basically it works. There's a lot of conflicting policies, especially for international students, which if we can get into at some point, I'll definitely briefly describe, but I'll wait till later on that. But basically on a federal level, those laws would control, but there's no federal laws on it. So then it goes to the state laws, and there are 50 state laws. Well, more than that, but there's 50 different examples of these state laws. And then it goes to, the NCAA policy. That would be the next controlling one. And there is interim policy, but it's subject to change, and it's going to change again. And then each school, and then there's the conferences that may have regulations or rules on it, and then each individual school and how they actually do their policy. So all of these are interacting, and sometimes they end up conflicting. And that's a huge problem. And we're going to be running into more and more of that until Congress actually does something.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm one of the PAC-Hub's AI specialists. Today, I want to show you why PAC-Hub is the ultimate platform for college baseball players looking to transfer to a new college program. First, let's take a look at our extensive network of coaches. With over 150 coaches actively using our system, you have a huge pool of experts to connect with. Imagine having access to all these experienced coaches searching for talent like yours. You even have the ability to connect with any of these coaches via our internal messaging system. This means more opportunities to showcase your skills and find the perfect new team. Now let's switch gears and see things from a coach's perspective. Coaches can easily search for athletes by position or stat. Let's say I'm looking for a left-handed pitcher with good pitching stats. With just a few clicks, I can find top-performing pitchers who meet my criteria. This efficient search functionality ensures that coaches find the perfect fit for their teams and athletes get matched with opportunities that suit their strengths. PAC-Hub is all about connecting talent with opportunity. Whether you're an athlete looking to transfer to a new college team or a coach searching for the next star player, PAC-Hub has the tools you need to succeed. Don't miss out on the chance to be part of this amazing community. Join PAC-Hub today and take the next step in your baseball journey. Visit www.pac-hub.com to sign up now.
So when it does conflict, like, are there examples that you can think of off the top of your head of those conflicts arising and how that all plays out?
Well, I think that from my actual experience, the big thing that's conflicting is for these international students. So for instance, F1 foreign national student athletes are being left behind because there's strict requirements for F1 students that you cannot earn active income. And what happens is you can earn passive income, and you can also be employed only under on-campus activities, which is narrowly defined and it's statutorily required. However, the way the NCAA is moving, especially if with this whole pay-for-play potential issue, a lot of the NIL opportunities are only active. So that leaves this really big gap where all these other students are able to benefit off of it. However, international students are not. But there are a couple solutions. Do you mind if I get into them really quick?
Go for it.
So basically, there's this article, Oklahoma Law Review article by Eric and Kit Johnson, that states that they could license instead of contract for the NIL right of publicity, which goes back to that right of publicity that we were discussing before. And what that does is a license is more passive. It's passive, while a contract is inherently more active. So that could be a possible solution. However, that's not without risk, because the second, the government decides that that's not okay, and because it hasn't been tested, they could put the hammer down and these people could lose their status. So it's pretty risky. Another workaround that I've seen implemented or I've heard of implemented is that people can do the work abroad. They could put a billboard up in Canada for whatever product they're endorsing. However, that becomes complicated, and not to pick out on any country, but like, let's say Uzbekistan, there's an Uzbekistani athlete. The company may not want to market there for strategic reasons. And so that just is not a possible way to do it. And then another possible solution to that is that you could essentially try to filter these activities through on-campus activities through that statutory definition, which I've not heard that argument yet, but I do think that may be a possibility, but who knows? So that to me, that is the biggest conflict that I see, because I see that every day. And I'm worried that we are we're not intentionally, but this policy is discriminatory against our foreign national student athletes. And I hate to see that.
Right. I can completely see why that would be the case. That is fascinating. So many different aspects of this. I'm glad that we've been able to touch on just some of them. I know we can go on for hours and hours, but we only have a couple of minutes left. So what I'm going to do, Sam,
Sure.
I'm going to put you in the shoes of a dictator, right? You have all the power here, okay? You are the man, Emperor Sam Finkel, okay? And you can solve all of these issues What does the solution look like to you?
I think the solution is implementing Jody Balsam's idea. Get rid of NIL as a concept entirely. Make everything right of publicity and allow students to make their money on a free market basis, what they're worth and on their endorsements. Now, I do think there needs to be some protective mechanisms in order to make sure Jervon Dexter situations don't happen. But I think we are creating a framework that is unnecessary. I also think a solution could be unionization of the players and collective bargaining potentially, but that has its own issues. And there's no 100% good way, but I think it's weird that we are creating this box for sports that doesn't exist anywhere else. Do I think there needs to be protection? Because I think people can be taken advantage of, especially because athletes tend to be some of the highest paid people in the world, not just in the US, but I don't know. But I think this framework is artificial and unnecessary. And I think that would solve a lot of the problems. And I think Congress should act on it. Regardless, I think Congress should act on it.
Fascinating. And actually, there was one other question I do want to ask.
Sure.
I guess we can go back to, I believe this was involved in the House settlement. There has been talk of college athletes becoming employees, right? With this settlement, that's what it would in many ways look like. What does that entail in terms of a coach saying, hey, we brought you in, we're giving you this money, you did not rush for 1,000 yards or hit 15 home runs, you are fired. Are there protections in place for that? Has there been talk about what that may look like?
So it's a very interesting, framing. There are potential issues with that. And I know that there was that NLRB, memo that was created that said they were employees, but that was, I believe, rescinded. And so there is this real big gray area of whether they're employees or not. And if they do get the distinction of employees, well, going back to, the foreign national thing, that would be completely violative of F1s, and they couldn't exist for student athletes. So I think that's a consideration that at least I would be interested in seeing. But yeah, I mean, that you effectively create a system in which you probably could, and there would need to be some protections. And I believe that there are some that would exist just in employment law generally. However, I think you really would need to, have something in place to really protect, the student athletes, because there is risks to calling them employees, but it would also entitle them to some benefits that they are deprived of. So it's a balance, right? And the solution again is just if we had some clear guidance from the top down, from the federal government, that would really resolve a lot of these issues. But again, I don't see that happening anytime soon. But that would fix a lot of these issues for sure.
Okay, well, there are certainly many issues to discuss. I'm glad that we got to touch on some of them today, Sam. I will say we would love to have you back on as this settlement moves through the courts and things are changed and finalized and tweaked and objections are submitted, like you mentioned earlier. I would love to have you on for some updates. But until then, Sam, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
There you have it, Sam Finkel. Much appreciated. I hope that you all learned something from that conversation. I certainly did. A really smart guy, and I'm lucky to call him a good friend as well. Really appreciate all of you joining us for episode number 2 of the Around the Huddle podcast powered by PAC-Hub. We will be back twice a week, and we will give you all the information that you need about the ever-changing landscape of college athletics. One last reminder, we are powered by PAC-Hub. Take a look, bottom of your screen. Please visit www.pac-hub.com. That is PAC-HUB.com. If you are a student athlete and you're in the transfer portal, if you're a coach and you are looking for somebody in the portal, sign up for PAC-Hub. Sign up for PAC-Hub. It is the easiest way to make that match. PAC-Hub.com. Thanks again to Sam Finkel for joining us today. Thanks again to all of you for joining us today. We'll be back soon with another episode. This has been the Around the Huddle podcast powered by PAC-Hub.